Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, hooligan shields, just like search peasants, vassals. Sayonara, useful idiot sons. I'm Useful Idiot, and what better way to usher out 2013 than to talk about Fukushima. And I'm going to talk about Fukushima in the context of an unfolding global horror show. And this unfolding global horror show has three basic parts. One is the technical aspects of so-called decommissioning these nuclear reactors, which is a nightmare in itself. And then the second part of this unfolding global horror show is the decimation of the Pacific region, both on land and on sea. And last but not least, we have the unfolding horror show of essentially what amounts to a large slave labor force working in that region who probably face certain death. So three components of this unfolding global horror show. So first of all, let's talk about the technical aspects. So now we have the most dangerous part after 3+ years of having the world saturated with radioactivity from Fukushima. Unlike Chernobyl, Chernobyl's covered. Fukushima's been exposed this whole time. So radioactivity has been going into the air and into the water for this entire time. Of course, everyone knows by now that hundreds of tons of water have been released on a regular basis into the Pacific Ocean. Hundreds of tons of radioactive water. And so now we have the moving of 1,400 spent fuel rods, 400 tons worth, supposedly 22 at a time, supposedly going to be finished by March of 2014. And we have a first big red flag, of course, is now they've already pushed that forward 3 years. So now they're pushing forward 3 years. So we're going to have to face 4 years of this very delicate process. Everyone who's been paying attention already knows that if anything goes wrong with this removal of these spent fuel rods, it's a very delicate operation, then we are going to have a global catastrophe. We already have a global catastrophe, but this will certainly clinch it. And there's 3 other reactors, so this is going to take 40 years, if not 100 years, to deal with. And that includes all the radioactive debris, and then all the other phenomena that we already know about. The radioactive groundwater has the most dangerous levels of radioactivity recorded since this event happened, which seems to confirm the fact that the building is sinking into the ground and teetering and buckling. The foundation is crumbling, and the reactors are already sinking into the earth. And so we have a unfolding horror show. And then we have all these tanks storing all this water, radioactive water, used to cool the spent fuel rods. And there's 1,000 some odd tanks and 1,000 more to come. And we already have many of them leaking. And many of them leak hundreds of tons more radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. So, and the part of the horror show we're seeing from all this activity is a couple of recent events. An American ship that sailed right into the radioactive plume when the tsunami and earthquake first happened at Fukushima. And they recently filed suit. Many of the sailors got together and filed a suit and were claiming that they have brain tumors, thyroid cancer, testicular cancer, leukemia, blindness, impotence, and fatigue. And all these associated with radioactivity. And the ship, of course, has a desalinization system, so all these sailors cooked, bathed, and drank in this radioactive water taken right out of the bay there. And I understand this case has already been dismissed by a judge, but it will be interesting to see if we see more and more of this. And in fact, we have spiked instances of thyroid cancer on the west coast of the U.S. and in Japan. And of course, they're blowing it off now, but we're going to see more and more of that as well. And then the other part of the phenomenon in this global horror show is the effects we're seeing in the Pacific Ocean now. And Of course, there's a lot of people already denying that there's any connection between this spate of recent phenomena and Fukushima and radioactivity, but it'd be hard to ignore as well, having starfish all up and down the west coast of the United States basically dissolving, Alaska seals and sea lions covered with lesions and tumors and sores, radioactive bluefin tuna, and sockeye salmon, which of course have a huge migration route from that part of the Pacific to this. And we also have a reduced sockeye salmon catch this year. And sardines, reportedly they haven't caught one sardine off the coast of Alaska this year. And the Pacific herring are all bleeding from the eyes and the gills. And we have radiation measured on the beaches in California and in Washington. And this is even before the gigantic debris fields from the tsunami start washing up all the way over from Japan, start washing up on the beaches of the west coast, some of which has already made it here. And so we have radiation plumes, steam being released recently. All this radiation went into the air and came down precipitation across the west coast of the U.S. and the rest of the U.S. as well. And that trend will continue as long as we have exposure to radiation. So, and hundreds of tons of more radioactive water are planned to be dumped into the Pacific Ocean. And so we're going to see more of these type of phenomena undoubtedly. And then to get to the last part, that's the actual workforce. And so far they've hired 50,000 workers so far. They have 12,000 working directly in the plant itself. And for the people who work in the highly radiated plant zone, they get an extra $100 a day from the government, which will come in real handy when they're all dying of cancer in not too many years. But 50,000 workers is a large workforce to maintain in a country with an aging population, and certainly one of the more unattractive job opportunities on the planet Earth. And not only that, it's worse than you think, because apparently 90% of the construction industry is run by gangs in the Yakuza. So we have 20 major contractors and 800 so-called subcontractors, with every scam imaginable happening in this Wild West. And the reason why I say it's more like a slave labor camp is because they're paying $6.50 an hour for most people, and that they're doing removing topsoil, cutting grass, scrubbing down houses, and removing debris. But they are charged for their food and housing, and then they have their wages skimmed by all these gang middlemen, and they end up basically being slave labor, and they find themselves getting into debt just trying to live in this environment, not to mention the fact that they're probably all going to die. And but think about that, 50,000 workers right now, they're 25% undermanned, so they prefer to have 75,000, and they need to maintain a workforce this size for decades to come. So quite a task ahead of Japan on this one. And of course, one of the saddest parts is there's people that were recruited who are then brought in to work in radiated areas where they were told they were not going to be working. Or even worse, we have recruiters and gangs going up and rounding up the homeless in Japan. And they get a $100 a head bounty for rounding up the homeless and making them part of the slave labor workforce that's doing the cleanup at Fukushima. And so that certainly qualifies as a global horror show unfolding there, certainly on a human level. And so just to put icing on the cake, then to top it off, we have a 3-year extension going on for the deadline for when these fuel rods are going to be removed, just from that one reactor. And there's a 95% chance of another earthquake in those same next 3 years. And let's remember, this fuel rod pool is set up 100 feet in the air in a building and sinking to the ground and teetering with a rotting foundation in a radiated landscape. And then to add the horror show for the elites, the horror show for the taxpayers of Japan, not only are they going to be irradiated for years to come, but they're going to have to shell out trillions of dollars in yen, trillions of dollars in yen in expenses to pay for not only this gargantuan project, but also the maladies that the entire population of Japan will undoubtedly have after this is over. So, my hat's off to people like Ms. Milky the Clown who make this issue, Fukushima, their main focus on a day-to-day basis, because it is the most important issue of our time right now. All this other stuff really won't matter if things don't go well at Fukushima. And thus far, they certainly have it. And I'd like to be more optimistic, but the way that Japan has handled this so far, the way the international community has handled it so far, the way that TEPCO has handled it so far, does not bode well for the future. And that's why I'm safe in referring to it as an unfolding global horror show. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.